So good afternoon and thanks for joining us. And we're going to ask the question today, has real estate gone wild? Many of you will probably say yes. My name is Bill Kennedy from the New York MBA's Education Committee, along with our chairperson, Elizabeth Cheney, and our president and vice president of the New York MBA are Mike Pulver and Sherry Eccles, along with our executive director, Joe Culver. Before you get started, a few quick housekeeping notes. Please use our chat function to notify us of any technical issues you may have. During today's webinars, all lines are muted except for our presenters. Throughout the session, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. Please do so. Use the chat, and we'll do our best to answer all of them. And please stay connected with the New York MBA. We're on LinkedIn. Our website is newyorkmba.org, and our YouTube channel is where we post recordings of our webinars like this one, and it's at New York Mortgage Bankers Association. We always say this, and we still do. We urge you to join the Mortgage Action Alliance. It's easy, it's free, and it's a way to stay informed on legislative issues in our business. And before we get going with our esteemed panel, put these on your calendar. We have an Affordable Friday on Friday, March 21st with Sherry Eccles and Brian Garris. And Elizabeth and I will have a session of 10 on Tech session with Jackie Gralczyk on Tuesday, March 25th. We have three esteemed guests with us today. We're lucky to have them. So far in our site, we can see Christian Klug, who's an associate real estate broker at Howard Hanna and a certified licensed real estate appraiser. That's a great combination. With 20 years in the business, serving the greater capital region and the Southern Adirondacks. And Jim Yockel is the CEO for the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors, representing over 3,000 realtors covering 11 counties in Rochester, the Finger Lakes, and the Southern Tier. He's been in the real estate industry for 27 years. And soon to be joining us will be Tom Herkenham of the DeAngelis Group. He has 3 decades of real estate and mortgage banking experience. He serves on the Adirondack Regional Chamber of Commerce. He's a past board member of the Northeast New York MBA and of the Empire State MBA's task force. So they all have a very well-rounded experience in the business, and I think this is going to be great. You're going to see Elizabeth and I stay on screen today. We're going to be asking questions of the panel and hoping we get Tom on soon. He's having issues getting into our site, but we hope to get him soon. So Elizabeth, I will turn it over to you for our first question.
Okay, great. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
So today we're going to start with a look back to 2024. Last August, the NAR lawsuit settlement changed the way you now disclose a commission paid to agents in a purchase and sales transaction. Please give us your perspective on that settlement.
Either one of you, jump right in.
Jump right in.
Let Christian start with this one.
Yeah. So, well, in some ways, people need to be reminded it's only for residential real estate, not for commercial. So I personally do both residential and commercial. Just did a commercial deal this morning, and in commercial, it did not apply. Okay, so that's one important thing right off the bat to clarify that. Really, in some ways, everything changed. In other ways, nothing changed. So the way I explain it to my sellers is this. I'm not allowed to disclose in the MLS, of course, what my co-broke fee is going to be. And really, the way the settlement is written, the homeowner really needs to be choosing what that co-broke fee is going to be, or buyer agent fee is really the better way to describe it. But in reality, the way I view it, it doesn't really matter what the seller is offering, because what really matters is what the buyer agent puts in the contract, and it is negotiable. And that's the whole part of this is NAR and DOJ want the buyer agent fee to be negotiable. And so as a buyer agent, if I sign up a buyer, before I can show them any houses, I'm going to sign an agreement that says what I'm going to get paid. I could choose to get paid 1% or 2% or 3%. And I'm sure different markets are going to be different best practices of what that is. In my Albany market, it tends to be a set fee that's pretty normal as a buyer agent fee. I won't disclose what that is for legal reasons. We're not supposed to talk about that. But it tends to be the same fee that most buyer agents expect to get. And so when I list a property, I explain to my sellers, when you get an offer, expect that the buyer agent is going to want to bake their fee into the cake, so to speak, of the purchase price of the home. Buyers typically don't want to write an extra check on top of the purchase price. But at the end of the day, it's negotiable. I think, ironically, this is actually causing commissions to go up, not down. But of course, that may be different in different markets. I'd love to hear what Jim has to say about Rochester and Southern Tier. I can only speak to what I'm seeing in the greater Albany market.
From my conversations, it seems like everybody's becoming comfortable. It was a big shift. And like Christian said, everything changed and nothing changed at the same time. It was really dramatic difference if you're a buyer's agent and you weren't used to having those conversations. But most buyer's agents are also seller's agents at one point, and that conversation with the seller has always been, here's what I charge, here's what I'm going to do for you, here's how it's going to work. So now you have to have that with the buyer. And I think that's good. I think it's different, but it's very clear and obvious what the buyer's agent is charging and what the buyer should expect to pay. I will disagree a little with Christian. I think that it should be different. It should go across the spectrum. Part of the issue was there was kind of an expectation about what someone should get paid, and the government said, nope, you need to all get paid based on your merits, and you need to put it in this contract. You need to give the buyer a chance to negotiate. And we're starting to see that happening. It's taken some time. Still, the majority of sellers are willing to pay buyer agent compensation. But like Christian said, most of the time now it comes in the purchase offer, and they're working it out. So it's, still it's only a few months, but it seems like that's sort of settling out. The one thing I will point out, because we warn all of our agents anytime we talk about this, we have to just be very careful of trying to create a different way of the same system as before. You're prohibited from sharing what you're offering as a seller in the MLS. You can still do it everywhere else on your brokerage website. You can do it on placemats at the restaurant. You can put it on a sign. You're not prohibited from offering it, just not in the MLS, because the government very clearly wants buyer's agents to know what they're being charged and have the ability to negotiate that with their buyer's agent.
Good.
It's almost creating more transparency.
I think so. And right up front, first time you're talking to your buyer, you need to say, this is what I charge. This is how I get paid. I think most agents are saying, we'll ask the seller to pay for it. Many of them will. If not, then this is what you'll owe me, and we'll have to talk about the difference. But I haven't heard any major issues yet.
Good.
One thing I was just going to throw in too that I've noticed is I tend to be seeing more double-sided deals where the buyer goes unrepresented and I, the listing agent, collect the full commission, which the way our contract is written, we collect the fee as the listing agent, just like there would have been a buyer agent. So it's going to still be that full commission. The seller doesn't pay less in that scenario, but it seems like buyer agents have been the ones hurt the most by this, and there seems to be less of them around.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think there, always unintended consequences. The people hurt most by this are the buyers with the least amount of money and the least amount of cash and the least ability to get, alternative financing. And I think that's contrary to what the government wants, but whether they didn't think it through or this is the first step of many, I don't know. But that's what I hear constantly. The higher end buyers are fine. They'll figure it out. It's the first time home buyer, the low income, the low cash buyer who's now pushed out of the market a little bit more. And that's unfortunate.
It is certainly not intended, I'm sure, but the best laid plans, as they say. All right, can we discuss dual licensing? It's been reported that nearly 1/3 of real estate agents are exploring the possibility of obtaining their MLO license. So from your perspective, are you seeing that move to do in New York? And second question to this is dual licensing the future of real estate or a legal and financial gamble? A lot there.
Jim, all you.
I'll go first this time. I'm not seeing it, but if it's happening, it wouldn't surprise me that I'm not hearing about it. What I do hear more often is agents saying, I might go and get licensed to be an appraiser. And, Christian could talk about how that works together. But I think as inventory is so constrained, people are looking for other ways to generate money. And looking for a second license in your specialty, it makes sense. I haven't heard too much about loan officers, but we just heard what yesterday, the day before, Rocket Mortgage bought Redfin. So maybe things like that lead to a change. I think that's interesting. We can talk about that later if anybody wants to.
Yeah.
But there's some major things moving this industry because of the tight inventory, the shrinking profits all around, that people are trying to maximize revenue wherever they can.
Good. Christian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I haven't seen any agents want to be loan officers. So I haven't experienced that. I think there are many agents who are going to look for other sources of income, whether it's within the real estate industry. I've definitely seen a lot more people willing to do rentals. That seems to be where agents will go if they can't make enough income on their sales side, which I'm kind of fine with that because I don't want to do rentals. Let other people do it, right? But you know, I was an appraiser first. I was an appraiser for 6 years full time, and then I became a salesperson. So now I've been 23 years as an appraiser and 17 as a realtor. So you know, I always tell the joke, who's smarter, the appraiser or the realtor? And I answer it as yes.
course you
I
do.
love it.
You know, that's what I go with. But
And you
yeah,
can.
look, I think any education is always great. So, but I see rentals as the big thing that realtors are moving into to get some extra income.
Very good.
Awesome. Thank you. Now let's move on to March 2025 and talk about several dynamics in the market. In 2024, the higher interest rates and tight inventory continued the seller's market dynamic with multiple bids on most listings, as well as strong cash buyers. Are you still seeing this intensity continuing into the first quarter of 2025?
I would say yes. I've said this many times in my different talks. I don't see anything pointing to a different type of market this year than the last 2 or 3 or 4. Rochester is among the worst markets in the country for inventory and has been for a long time. I could talk for a half hour about that. But it goes back 20 years. The trend is a 20-year trend here. I don't hear anybody telling me a real reason why they think there's going to be more inventory in our market or in our region. We've been underbuilding for a long time. There's no options for independent seniors who want to downsize, so they stay where they are and they keep living in that 3 or 4 bedroom home. Towns are resistant to new construction. Density's become a bad word, and you talk about townhouses or doubles or triples, and they traffic, it's gonna be awful. So we're just not seeing anything change. The 150 to 250 market is where the most demand is in our region, and it's impossible to build something new for that. We've been trying to talk about manufactured housing as a great option to fit that price range, but there's resistance to that. So we're kind of dispelling some old myths. We're trying to convince people that, quality of manufactured housing is way better. When we were in Albany with the MBA Advocacy Day, we really pushed the bill to stop considering it chattel and consider it real property. So there's a lot of things that are going to need to happen, but to answer your question for this spring,
All right, so
I just don't see it.
participate when it's my turn.
Oh, hey, Tom. Thanks for joining. Can you hear us? I heard him. All right. Yeah, Jim, we were up there advocating as well, and evidently to move manufactured housing to real property from chattel is accepted by both houses, but it hasn't been yet had enough oomph to be a bill. So hopefully that gets done. I was in with the Capital Region group, and we had no opposition to it. I could say that we saw both sides of the parties and no opposition to it.
Yeah, same in our group. Everybody was kind of in favor. We may have found an assembly sponsor in our talk. So yeah, hopefully.
Right. Regarding sellers, can you tell us in your conversations when you meet with them for the first time and pitch a listing, do you think do the people feel that their house is worth more than it really is? And if so, how do you convince them to list with your company? So there's a 2-part question again.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So I think, really it can be case by case. I had a client recently who, interestingly, she was a realtor from downstate, in New York State, licensed and I work primarily in a second home market. So I was gonna, going back to the question we just talked about with, overall the market and inventory, half my deals are cash. The commercial deal I did today was cash. And so, interest rates just don't matter. And, or they're selling a property to buy a property. So it's just a roll. It doesn't matter. So inventory is tight. But I had a client who was a realtor from downstate, and she called me up. She goes, "Look, Christian, I know you live on the lake yourself. I know you do the majority of real estate on the lake, and I don't think I can represent my own house. Can you sell it for me?" I was like, "Well, I'm honored to have another realtor, actually a different company even, hire me." And I gave her a price, and she goes, "Chris, I did think that's too much." And I said, I really don't. I think we're going to do well. And so we listed it for $899. She had bought it 20 years ago for like, $275, of course. And we ended up multiple offering it and selling it for $925 cash. 3 of my 4 offers were over asking. So in that case, even the realtor thought the price was too high, and I was confident we would get it. I've got one I'm working on right now, which will be probably in the 1.3, 1.4 range. And the owner seems to be right where, he's right on the money, pun intended. And so I think for the most part, people are realistic, but we are seeing a ceiling to prices. And if we try to push them too high, buyers are just going to sit back and just say, yeah, no, I'm not going to pay that price. And it will sit on the market. So if a property is priced right, it will sell in the first 30 days with multiple strong offers. If it's overpriced, it is going to sit.
Are you seeing we're seeing the same dynamic, but it's interesting that, if you're 10,000 over what they think the right price is, it sits, but then the multiple offers bid it up 40,000 over that, too high price. It's really crazy. And there's no logic to it in some ways.
Well, the logic is this. It's if nobody wants it, then I want to pay less. But if someone else wants it, then I'm willing to pay more. And
That's true.
Right. And so I give this example to people. I always say, because everyone laughs at this example. I say, remember when you were in junior high or high school, and you were single and you wanted to date this girl, but she didn't like you. But the minute you dated some other girl, then suddenly she liked you, right? Like everybody wants what they can't have. And I think it's the same
Human
way.
nature.
Yeah.
That's a comparable, isn't it?
There you go. Perfect.
That was good. Sticking with sellers, do you folks still want to host open houses, or has that dynamic changed given the faster sales and shorter marketing times?
I'll answer. It depends on the market. Certain rural markets, people just don't want them because it's, all I'm going to get is my nosy neighbors that want to see the inside of my house. And, I've got a $1.2 million lake house, but the place next to me is a tear down shack, and I don't want those people walking through my place. So it really depends on the market. I sometimes do them. I'd say that most of the time I do not.
How about you, Jim?
Yeah, I hear mixed, it's very similar to that. Some agents like it, some agents don't. Depends on the home, depends on the agent, depends on the location. It's kind of all over the board.
And you both have, lake experience, second home,
Yep.
in your markets. So that's interesting.
Is I'm going to stay with sellers. Walk us through your conversation as a seller's agent when you bring them multiple offers on their listing.
I think that's for Christian.
Yeah. So depending on how many offers it is, if it's 2 offers, then that's pretty simple because it's just a
Sure.
side-by-side comparison. So years ago, back when COVID started, I actually created like an Excel spreadsheet that I create a template for, and then I just share it with my clients. And so, I've had deals with 18 offers, and it's like, how do you even keep track of that? And so my admin and I, as the offers come in, we'll put them into the spreadsheet and we'll break down the specifics. Of course, there's the price, there's the deposit, is it cash? Is it pre-approval? When are the inspections? What's the threshold for the inspections? How much is the escrow? Is there an escalation clause? Like there's just the meat and potatoes. And so we will do it side by side. And then I'll, usually over the phone, have my client pull up that spreadsheet, and I'll say, okay, look, offers 1, 2, 5, 7, and 8 are really non-starters because of these issues. Now we're left with these 3 or 4. Here's the positives and negatives. And usually, it's easy for me if there's a clear winner, right? And most of the time there is a clear winner. Just 2 weeks ago, I had a lake property with 4 offers, so it wasn't a ton of offers, but we had 2 that were significantly lower. That was easy. And then we had 2 that were the exact same price, the exact same escrow, and both cash as is. They were literally the same offer. And so then I went to client and I said, look, what do you care about the most? And they said, well, we care about more money. And I said, okay. But they didn't want to offend one of the parties. They said, we don't want to offend either one, because honestly, they were fine with either offer. And I said, well, does $5,000 more make a difference? They go, yeah, $5,000's great. Get us $5,000. We'll take whichever one goes up $5,000. And they gave me the discretion they said, you go to whatever offer you think will be more likely to go up $5,000. So I had a relationship with the one realtor who brought in the other one. So I went to her because I knew she wouldn't be offended. And their proof of funds was 1.7 on a 300 purchase. So I'm like, well, $5,000 to a 1.7 proof is a lot less than a proof of funds that was literally just over. So it's just about
Sure.
providing them information and letting them decide what's most important to them.
That's great. And again, maybe helping them choose based upon what their goals and wants are. Great. I like the
And that-
idea, an Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah. The next questions were for Tom, but I don't think we have him on. So I'm gonna
I think
No,
he's on, he's on by phone, I believe.
Oh, okay. You can
Can
hear
you,
us, Tom?
can you hear me?
Yes,
sure
loud and
can.
clear.
Welcome.
Very good.
I
Well,
apologize for the technical difficulties, and I'm disappointed I'm not visible, especially because today's a rare day where I have a button-down shirt and a sport coat that fits us.
Wow.
So,
It's our loss, Tom. It's our loss. So right off the
So,
bat, we're going to put you
I'm
on the
here.
spot. We have a couple
Perfect.
questions for you. So, can you tell us how you handle conversations representing a seller or a buyer in any transaction? So if anything comes
Sure.
up at the table, I guess is what we're getting to here.
well, okay. So the whole idea is to make sure it doesn't come up at the table, because that would be, pretty much a disaster, because as we know, with purchase prices where they are, a 2.5% commission isn't going to be a couple $100 item. So literally the last place you want to be is sitting at the table with confusion as to who's responsible for a particular commission. So this is, somewhat relatively new to us, because in the past, we hardly ever, if ever, discuss commissions with the clients. When you talk to a seller, you would confirm the percentage that they agreed to pay typically, but with a buyer, very rarely, if ever. Nowadays, it's part of what we do during attorney approval, because if the buyer doesn't demonstrate that they have the understanding that the documents that I received has, I have to have the power that the attorney approval contingency gives me to either amend or perhaps back out of the deal. So with the buyers, for instance, when we received the new contract, we discussed with them, what is your expectation for how the commissions are being paid? Do you have any obligation? And for the most part, it's still pretty much a negative response to that question, but there's certainly, I would say, 20 to 25% where they say, yes, I do. And then the trick becomes to make sure the way they think they're going to pay the commission is the same way it's presented in the transaction. So what we want to do is we ask them or the agent for a copy of the buyer broker agreement. Once the buyer confirms, yes, I'm responsible for commissions, we button up that the agreement reflects their expectations. And in some instances, what we have to do also is talk to the mortgage loan officer and make sure, for instance, if this is set up as a commission or a concession rather, forgive me, that's going to be acceptable. Or if there is no concession, I like to just touch base quickly to see if we're going to have a cash to close issue for the buyer. So those are the conversations that we have with buyers that we typically, didn't have in the past. And, a couple months ago, maybe there was a little turbulence, but I think it's all been pretty much worked out and goes relatively smooth now. With the sellers, again, we'll review their listing agreement, confirm with them their understanding of what commissions they're paying, and then move forward and give the contract attorney approval.
Makes sense. And Christian had told us earlier that buyers don't like writing additional checks, so that all makes sense.
I was speaking with an agent today, and I asked the question, do you find it difficult to get the agreement signed, the buyer broker agreements? And the feedback was in a few cases, yes. And I can imagine, you know, most of the buyers that come through are either first-time home buyers or maybe did it 15, 16 years ago. They're fairly intimidated by some of the numbers that they've seen to this point, and to add another additional charge to that, yeah, is problematic.
I bet. Second question for you, Tom. Can you
Yeah.
talk to us about hybrid closings? I mean, obviously, COVID came along and that became mandatory, but what percentage are you seeing and how are you and your firm handling it?
Okay, percentage-wise, I'm gonna say 40%, perhaps. I think they're good for if your goal is to lessen the time that everyone's in a conference room together. I have some hesitations from a lender perspective in that I've been to a few hybrid closings where there hasn't been either a closing disclosure or a note. And it just strikes me that of all the documents that we're signing, you might want to have the note and the CD have a wet signature on it. And so if I'm in the closing as the buyer's attorney, I'm handed a loan package and we're starting with, you know, I don't want to say silly, but we're starting with disclosure, and then we make our way through and we get perhaps an application and the mortgage. And I've never had an opportunity to say to my client, here's your interest rate, you know, to confirm with them that the rate at the closing is the same they anticipated. Also, sometimes I'll be going through the paperwork and a client will say to me, do I have PMI on this loan? And I think, well, I don't know yet, but had we started with a CD, I could have answered that question quickly because that would have been disclosed right on the CD. So I have kind of mixed feelings. I think it's probably a positive for the majority of people in the room who are looking to get in and out. For a buyer's attorney and his client, I don't, you know, I mean, the 15 minutes, that 10 to 12, 15 minutes that we're saving, I don't know if there's a bang for the buck for that.
Right.
So that'd probably be my take on that.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's move now on to
And-
buyers. Tell us how you guys work with first-time home buyers, especially over the past 2 years with the disadvantage of submitting a bid against cash offers, non-contingent contracts, etc.
You're asking me this question?
Nope, I'm asking Christian and Jim.
Oh, forgive me. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
That's fine. Yep.
But maybe you could chime in if you have any suggestions. Feel free.
No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, I can start with that one. I think it's about setting expectations of you know, what they're up against. And so, you know, buyers will come to me, you know, let's say 10, 15 years ago, a buyer would come to me with a $250,000, $300, $250,000 to $300,000 budget. And I'd be like, okay, good. We got lots of options. Now a buyer comes to me with $250,000, $300,000, and I'm like, yeah, what raised ranch that's 50 years old do you want to buy? Maybe. Right. And, you know, they think, well, 4-bed, 2-bath colonial on 2 acres. I'm like, that ain't happening, even in Herkimer County. Right. So, you know, it's about setting expectations of location, what they're going to get, and then, of course, how competitive it will be. I definitely, I lean on dropping inspections or raising thresholds, which I know a lot of people will sit there and say, oh, that's dangerous. You shouldn't do that, blah, 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 blah. And I go, yeah, well, look, you can have a buyer who's homeless for 2 years because they can't find a home, or you can do your due diligence at the viewing and look around and just prepare yourself. Like, you know, I think it's just about, once again, providing that information to a buyer and saying, look, if you buy this as is, you are taking the risk that tomorrow anything could break. But by the way, if you get a home inspection, you still can have anything break tomorrow, right? And there's less of a risk because hopefully the home inspector finds those things. But you know, when I go back 20 years ago, home inspections were not the norm. They were rare. It's only been the last 10, 15 years that the home inspection became like this required thing. And now we're starting to see a lot of buyers realize that, yeah, if I want to be competitive, I just can't do that. Or at least have to raise the threshold significantly. Our contract's 2,000, Jim. I don't know what yours is. What's your standard threshold?
I don't know that there's a standard threshold. I think each company and each agent handles it differently.
Yeah, so our MLS has a 2,000 per individual item threshold in inspections. So
Yeah.
if the inspector finds something wrong for $500, buyer can't back out. So 2,000 is what's in the MLS as a standard, but we actually changed our contract to be 2,000 checkbox or blank. And we see many buyers raising that threshold to 5 or 10,000 even as an individual item. And what this does, it makes it so the buyer would have to find something really, really significantly wrong to legally be able to, you know, negotiate or walk away. A buyer can't get cold feet over, you know, a leak in the roof, quite honestly, because a leak in the roof probably isn't 10 grand. It's probably,
For
you know, a
sure,
couple.
for sure.
Yeah,
You know, is
And
that
I-
a New York thing, Christian? The fact that there's so many home inspections where there wasn't before, or is that national to your knowledge? I know you guys are all.
Yeah, I guess to my knowledge, it's national. I think it's an industry thing. I think it's, yeah, I mean, I'm probably gonna have a different opinion about home inspections than a lot of other people in the industry. I overall don't think they're actually great for the industry as a whole. I think it's like asking a roofer if you need a roof. It's asking your insurance guy if you need more insurance. The answer is always going to be yes, right? So yeah, I think it's just been naturally the industry has become more prone to home inspections, which once again, on its surface isn't a bad thing, but I think it tends to cause bigger issues in other areas as well.
Jim, what's your perspective?
I'll approach it from a different angle. 'Cause
Sure.
I don't work with individual transactions, and I might have misunderstood your question, Christian. There may be something in our contract. I'm not sure. I'd have to look it up, a minimum amount. But we've been approaching it from the association with just trying to educate people doing grants that how difficult it is for anybody who's getting a grant to actually win a competitive offer, and that they need to rethink how they're offering grants. If the getting the grant is contingent on having, you know, your offer accepted, you're never going to do it. And trying to work with people in government to help them understand that many of these all cash offers are from corporate buyers, landlords, people with large portfolios who can afford to do it. And that we need to be aware of that. And I know the governor recently has been talking a lot about corporate hedge fund, private equity owners and what she would like to do. And we're engaging with her on that conversation, but we're just trying to raise awareness that the people we're trying to help, this first-time home buyer, the low-income buyer, the things we're doing to help them aren't working.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough. I just kind of want to pivot off the same question with first-time home buyers. How about renovation financing? There's so many homes, particularly I know in the Capital District here, that require renovation. And now there's so many options, Fannie, Freddie, FHA. FHA's lightened up a lot of the requirements with a limited 203K to make it much more advantageous for buyers to maybe have the perspective. Yes, here's your ranch with your 2-bedroom ranch, but maybe from, you know, from a selling perspective, you know, envision this property type of thing, or sell the potential type of thing. Did you folks ever think of, I mean, what's your perspective on renovation financing? Is something that you're like, oh, it's going to take forever to get through, or something that maybe will get your first time home buyer into the home of the dreams that they know they certainly can't afford in our market?
I think
I think-
any type of non-conventional financing is always going to be viewed as less desired than conventional. So in a multiple offer situation, let's go back to that spreadsheet. I've got all of them lined up, and you got cash is king. We all know that.
Of course, yeah.
Okay. And then let's say we got conventional, and then we got an FHA, a USDA, a VA, a Sunny Mae, which is a swear word for most realtors, right? And
Unfortunately, it happens to be in New York.
and if it's an FHA 203K, they're going to be viewed as less wanted by the seller
Sure.
because of the strings attached. Conventional is always going to be viewed. So actually, to go back to your other question, about this education with first time home buyers. If they're going, oh, hey, I want to buy a house with 3% down with a 6% seller concession, I'm like, how about we wait 6 months? How about you save up money, do a 5% conventional with no seller concession? And to be honest, that's better anyway. You're like, I was an appraiser back in 08, and I remember the 110% financing, no money down disasters that were going on where people had no equity and they were underwater the minute they closed. So, yeah, I think having your first time home buyers have a little bit more money, getting a little bit more down and not needing concessions almost don't exist for the most part in most. I actually can't remember the last time we had a seller concession for closing costs.
Gotcha.
I think I would just add to that, looking from the buyer's standpoint, I hear a lot of buyers aren't interested in renovation. They want move-in ready. They want everything to be nice. They see HGTV. They want, everything to be just so, and they want it for the price they can afford, and they're not interested in doing the work. So with the difficulties in the market, I'm wondering if that's going to change, and people out of desperation are going to take something that's a little, less ready and needs some work, and those programs might come back. But I think Christian's right. You get outside of the easy transaction, and when you have 17 offers, why would you take the one that's hardest? And you can't blame the seller for that.
No, you can't. You can't.
The other thing Christian said, I think, is really important is we have not, as an industry, been used to telling a buyer, maybe you can't afford to buy a home right now. And we had this conversation a lot when the settlement came up, when the buyer's agents are saying, I have to ask this person to commit to paying me a certain amount of money right up front, they're going to say no. And we said, you may have to tell some people you're not ready to buy a home yet. You need to go and save some money, figure some out, find some other financing. And I don't think that's been the norm for the last 30 years. There's always been something you could find someone a home they can afford. In our region, you can't now.
Yeah, I know it's really tough. I think you kind of already answered this question, but is there anything you want to add? Staying with buyers, tell us how you would work with them to prepare for the home purchase process.
I was just gonna piggyback on what Jim said there. Like, I
Sure.
think back in 09, like I was a realtor in 09, and people would call me and they go, I want to sell my house. And I'd be like, all right, let's talk about what it's worth. And they'd owe more than what it was worth. And I would just simply tell them, like, we can't sell your house unless you're willing to bring a check to the table. And that was okay. It was okay to tell people you can't sell. And I think as a good realtor, we need to now tell buyers, like, I literally had a guy today. He's like, I want to buy a multifamily that cash flows. And I'm like, yeah, that doesn't exist today. It doesn't. Like, he's like, well, I'm looking for a good deal. I'm like, yeah, you and 4,000 other guys that, and they have cash and you're not. He he wants to spend 100,000 and find a multifamily in Saratoga County that cash flows. That dog does not hunt. And if I take that buyer on, I like to have food with my meals. Like, I can't make a living trying to find a unicorn, right? It just doesn't work. And so you gently need to tell people, like, that can't happen. You can't buy what you're looking for in this market.
Yeah.
All right. So this could be, all three of you can chime in. However, I think Christian, being the appraiser, might have first dibs on the answer. So regarding home appraisals and valuation in the process, please give us your feedback on the appraisal process. If you've encountered any issues with properties not appraising for the higher bidded up price, and any other comments that would be helpful to our attendees from your realtor perspective.
So in clarification, I primarily do litigation and estate planning appraisals. So I do very little. I won't do any for any appraisal management companies. An appraisal management company calls me, I'm like, yeah, no. So I do some portfolio clients, but 90% of my job is as a realtor, 10% as an appraiser. I would say no, but once again, 50% of my deals are cash. And if we do have a multiple offer where it goes over asking, we're typically we're going to negotiate into the contract an appraisal waiver. Now, it's interesting, little dirty trick. A lot of times we'll want that appraisal waiver in the attorney approval, not in the contract, because we don't want the appraiser to know it, right? Because what happens is if you put an appraisal waiver in the contract, then the appraiser sees it and they feel like, well, now I don't need to appraise it. Like, no, we want you to appraise it for what you're going to appraise it for, regardless of what the contract says. So sometimes we'll work that in through attorney approval, not in the contract. And
Got
do you
it.
know what I mean by an appraisal waiver?
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
they're rare though, right?
No, not at all.
No, we're actually now seeing, yeah, no, I think the databases are just growing so much bigger and there's so much more information out there that that's granting them.
Okay, so I guess I'm describing appraisal waiver differently. Sorry. An appraisal waiver in a contract would be, let's say a lake house is listed for, 750 and it bids up to 900,000. And let's say there is a cash offer for 800. Okay. But there's a financed offer for 900, but they're only financing 400. So they're putting down $500,000. So an appraisal waiver says it only needs to appraise for the amount needed for the mortgage,
I see.
not the appraisal price.
Got
So
it. I was
in
talking
that
about
essence,
VIWs. Okay.
it could appraise for 550 to appraise for list price, not purchase price.
Got it. All right. Tom, just wondering, do you hear any of this, issues on the appraisal side in your day-to-day? I know you're,
The way it comes to us typically at a very high percentage is if there is, as Christian referred to, the appraisal waiver, if that's a term of the contract, the buyers seem to have amnesia when the attorney approval comes around. It seems as if they agree to that, the euphoria of the deal, but when it's discussed at attorney approval, there's oftentimes instruction from them to try to get that to not be a term of the contract. So that's my perspective is, and if I get a contract in where I'm representing the seller, if I talk to them prior to an attorney approval letter being received from the buyer's attorney, I feel them out for what is your reaction going to be if I get a provision in their letter that says, let's strike the appraisal waiver language. So I kind of plant the seed for we may have to, cross that bridge. So my real world experience with it is I understand the objective of it, but it tends to, on our end, just create some back and forth before one side will blink on that. Okay. And just another comment, since we're on appraisals, if you don't mind me throwing this out there.
sure.
I don't see appraisal issues very often. Is that the same experience as everyone else is having?
Well, I think what the start of the question was the fact that overbidding is pushing the value up so high that the appraiser's having difficulty coming into value. And in that case, if that happened, it probably wouldn't get to you, wouldn't get to the closing table.
Yeah, because I am
Well,
seeing that
it would-
happen to a certain degree where the values aren't coming in exactly as where they should be.
See, that's interesting to me because I'll get a phone call from the agent saying, we're concerned a bit about the appraisal on this. It got bid up quite a bit. And to me, the overwhelming majority still appraise for the price.
No, I would agree with that. I'm just saying there are some that don't
Yeah.
keep the.
Yeah,
And,
oh no. Yeah, I just don't see too many of them.
Good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Via the chat line, our friend Jim Bopp chimed in that be sure to look when we're talking about, I assume he's talking about when we're talking appraisal issues, be sure to look at home style, home ready, et cetera. So
Or even for first time home buyers, because you compare a renovation loan with putting as little as 3% down.
right.
So that's the advantage there. And also you have 2 and 3 unit financing where you can go up to, in some cases, between either 95 to 97% on owner occupied multifamily renovation loans. So there is that conventional option that's out there.
Got
And
it.
I also just noticed he mentioned, to bring this up too, Bill, he also mentioned, how about ADUs? The governor also likes those.
Yeah, we've been
Yeah.
talking a lot about ADUs are a really great option for independent seniors, specifically. Seems to be most people are comfortable with, an aging parent who wants to live independently, can still get around, but being close to their family, that it makes a lot of sense. we've been engaging with an ADU expert who is she's a professor at the University of Wisconsin, I think, who has a really great presentation to try and get towns over the hump. I think the problem there is people are generally okay with that one use case, but then they go, well, what happens when mom moves into, assisted living? Then what happens to the ADU? Is it going to be some college kid who's going to have parties every night? And there's ways to address that. But most towns will have in their code the ability to have a detached garage, by regulation, as long as it meets, building code. But you're prohibited from having an ADU, and you have to get a special permit. So what's the difference? They're the same
Right.
basic structure. Could we just kind of flip to you're permitted to have one if it meets building codes? Not everybody's going to have one. It's not like there's going to be 5,000 in every town, but if you could put 10 or 20 in every town in the state, that goes a long way to closing the gap, but specifically starts the wheels turning. So an independent senior who's in a 4-bedroom home that they don't want gets to move into a nice small ADU, that home goes on the market. And that home is likely much closer to the price range for the first time home buyer than the brand new townhouse that we had to fight tooth and nail to get a town to approve. That's going to be 400,000. So it's a really important piece to start the market moving again.
Good.
Thank you.
Again, I'd say the same about manufactured housing. Fits the
Right.
price range, fits a lot of the things that we need. We've just got to change our perception of them.
Very good. Elizabeth,
All
I
right,
believe you're up.
let's move now on to mortgage loan originators and the lender side of the transaction. Please share with us 2 strong traits that you look for when working with mortgage loan originators. And I'll also add, what are the issues with an MLO that could cause you to stop working with them?
And this could be any of you, by the way.
For sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just
This one
say
goes to Christian.
responsive, like they need to respond quickly, as
Yeah.
realtors, we work 24/7, 363. There's 2 days a year that I think my clients allow me to not work, and that's Thanksgiving and Christmas. They expect me to work every other day except those 2. So, if you're on vacation, you just better have someone covering for you, because we have to get that offering because the property came on. So
For
maybe
sure.
be responsive. And then the biggest thing is, don't tell me you can make something work that then 4 weeks later you can't. I'd rather you tell me this is a dumpster fire of an application. Stop. Right? I don't want to go show 6 houses to someone who you think you can get qualified if they pay this off and do that and stand on one leg and look towards the east on sunrise, then they can get pre-approved. No, like we want to know they're solid if we're going to take them out as buyers.
I just want to add to that, speaking as I'm a corporate trainer with Homestead, and one of the first things I train anybody that's entering into the mortgage industry, one of the very first things is the importance of the pre-qual. Everything is in the pre-qual. The application should be seamless. That should flow. That should be no big deal. It's all in the pre-qual, and never ever put a letter in an agent's hands that they're pre-qualified and now they're showing houses for 6 months to a year and they can't get a deal closed. I totally can understand that. And I preach that in my training.
Jim or Tom, would you like to add on to that?
I think that's a really important point. We have to remember that consumers are at the heart of all of this. And
They really are.
we may think we're doing the right thing to help them, but what we're doing is frustrating them. And that gives everyone a bad name everywhere in the industry. And we don't need that. And sometimes the best thing is just, again, say you're not ready and have that conversation and help get them ready. But we have to stop trying to say yes to everything and making it work and then going back and disappointing people all over the place.
Disappoint them early, not late.
That's a good way of saying it, Bill.
Yeah.
True.
All right. Along that line, what is, and you may have already partially answered this, but what is more important to you? A loan pre-qualification where the MLO has a verbal answer to income and assets, or a loan pre-approval where the MLO has the loan underwritten and income, assets, and credit are verified? I think I know the answer, but
This is like a Sunday school church answer where they ask the question and you know the answer, right? Like it's pre-approval, of course.
Yeah, got it. Well, then I'm going to move on. Does your company still host a weekly caravan with agents viewing new listings? And do you also host realtor open houses?
Depends on the time of year for us. It will, in the wintertime, it's much less. I will say it's and I'd love to hear Jim's take on this, that the number of realtors is shrinking. Some by actual number, meaning they're giving up their license in their association. In some, they're out of the industry. They just don't know it yet. We joke about that. I saw an interesting statistic that said 50% of realtors nationwide sold 0 houses in 2024. And then something like 30% sold 2 or less. And so it's always been heavily weighted towards, the top 10, 20% of realtors.
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think it's becoming more that way right now because it's hard. It is harder this year than it was in anywhere between, let's say, 12 and 19, and then 21 through 23. Those were all easy years, to be honest. So now it's more work. And on my side, being a full-time agent, if I'm dealing with part-time realtors who don't answer their phone during the day, yeah, it's super challenging. And so it's definitely hard to get those realtors to show up to a caravan or to a broker's open because they have another job because they're only selling 3 houses a year. I personally think that's bad for the industry. I wish there was a way, and Jim might give you some ideas, so a way to make it so realtors, that were active had more transactions per year. But I'd love to see what Jim's thoughts are with his board and membership.
The short answer to your question, I don't hear too much about caravans. I do see some broker opens, but I'm not really well placed to answer that. But I think, Christian, you're right. The stats for our market are a little lower. 40 to 45% of agents haven't done a transaction in the last 12 months. I'll caveat that a little bit by saying some of them, a good chunk, may be buyer's agents on teams where they're not getting credit in the MLS for it. But this is a national statistic, and clearly there are a large group of people just not doing business. They could be brand new and haven't done their first deal yet. They could be mostly retired and just referring things out. They could be on a team. It's hard to gauge, but I would agree that having people who only do a deal every 2 or 3 years ultimately is not great for our industry. It goes back to the consumer representation and the quality of the transaction. You just can't be good at something that you're only doing every 2 or 3 years. And that's not to say you're not a good agent because you may be showing homes and listing homes, but even though not doing transactions, but it's something we have to come to grips with. The whole industry is based on headcount, and that may not be the best way to go moving forward. The other factor, you mentioned the last few years have been tough. Almost 50% of our members have joined since 2020. So they know one type of market post-COVID. They're not used to the networking and the getting to know other agents. We do regular breakfast events where we invite people to just come in and talk to each other, talk to us, see what's going on. And almost every time when we introduce each other, somebody goes, "Oh, hey, I did a deal with you last year. Nice to meet you." And we just don't know each other the way we used to. And that's a different problem. But number of agents is dwindling. I think across the state, probably 5 to 10% declines. I think is probably about the right range. We do our billing in the summer, and most do it around the holidays. So we won't know until July or August, but we're anticipating losing probably in that same 5 to 10% this year, just because it's tough.
Yeah.
I'll give a suggestion though. The only time realtor broker opens are successful is when one thing is done. What's the one thing that'll always bring realtors to a broker's open?
Food.
Good food.
Food, right? I mean, food.
I was just gonna say good food.
It's through the mouth, right? And so
It
it is
is.
true though. So we'll go to our lender partners. So, banks, credit unions, whatever, people that we're referring work to and say, "Hey, I've got these brokers opens. Would you like to come sponsor?" And that's a great way for us to partner because one, we get to spend some face time with that loan officer. And then honestly, we don't have to pay for the food. So encourage all your members, be like, yeah, that's a great thing for realtors because we don't want to shell out $200 to, feed all the realtors. But if you offer food, realtors will show up.
They will come. If you offer it, they will
Feed them
come.
and they will come.
looking ahead to our spring market, let us know your expectations for 2025, please. Knowing interest rates will likely remain high, or I guess there will be consistent rather than high. People got to get used to it, right? And inventory tight.
Yeah. Listen, the inventory tight is the story. I don't think interest rates are, I shouldn't say this to a bunch of bankers. I don't think they're that big a deal. If you need to move, you need to move, and 6% or 7% isn't going to change your life. It's when there's only 4 homes and you have to bid $50,000 over asking just to be in the running. I think that's a different story. You can always potentially refinance later. There's ways around that. Today in Monroe County, there's 303 homes for sale. And that probably should be 2,000, 3,000 in a more balanced market. And I go across the towns and the cities in our market, they're all the same. I was at a breakfast in Orleans County. There were 32 homes in the entire county for sale. And they laughed and said, yeah, 15 of them are awful, barely livable, who've been for sale forever. It's just all about inventory. Until that changes, nothing is going to change for the market. And it doesn't matter. Interest rates could go back to 4%, but if there's nowhere to move to, what am I going to do? I'm not going to sell my home and then hope. So we've got to fix the supply side.
I think that's a few more than what you noted though in January in the Rochester MBA. So that's a positive.
Like 8 more, yeah.
8 more.
Yeah, I think it was 294 on that one. It's just nuts, and nobody has a solution. And a quick go back to the governor. She was in Rochester making her announcement about her proposal for hedge funds to not be able to bid on a property for 75 days. We're supportive of trying to address the hedge fund ownership of single family housing, because that comes off the market. It never comes back. And if it does, it's probably because it's so awful that they can't make any money and they just walk away from it. And that's not what we want. So we've been engaging with her about finding ways we can prevent homes from going into that hedge fund beast to begin with. What I hear is if somebody's a local housing provider, they have 40 or 50 or 60 units, nobody's buying those other than hedge funds. So we've got to find a way to figure out how to get those back to owner occupancy without it going to the hedge fund in the first place. Because that's 20 to 25% of transactions by most accounts go to some sort of corporate ownership.
Wow.
For rental, not for owner occupancy.
And that's a fairly new phenomenon too. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, Elizabeth.
You think we have time for one last question, Bill, or should we?
I do. Well, yeah, if people need to drop, they drop, but if our contestants can stay on, that'll be great.
Okay, cool. Last question we have for you folks. Final question. Please each tell us from your perspective how best a lender can work together with you in 2025.
Yes, for Christian.
Yeah, I'd say, just keep me informed of, what products you have, stay in my ear and then answer the phone when I call. That's it.
I'll just add, we're all in this together. Builders, the realtors, the lenders, the appraisers, inspectors, we're all in this together. And that doesn't mean that we don't think about consumers. Without the consumers, none of us have a job, but we just have to focus on treating them right, giving them what they need, being honest and upfront with them, and working through it. There's some tough conversations that have to be had, but it's the situation we're in. And until we can change the situation, we just have to keep the consumer's best interest in mind.
Good idea. Tom, from your perspective, what do you think on that?
I would agree with everything that's been said. When you've been at it as long as I have, I've gotten to the point where everyone I work with, communication is key, and everybody seems to know that. So
Good.
I have no complaints, and would just say, though, that anyone just getting started in the lending realm, everything they just heard previous is right on the money. Responsiveness and communication.
Great.
Yeah, let me tag on that too. And I do a lot of deals with Tom's office, and what we love as the realtor is when both realtors, the loan officer, all the attorneys, everyone's saying, hey, we got the common goal. This shouldn't take 3 months. We should be able to do this in a decent amount of time. Let's work together, Sure, there might be speed bumps, but let's work in the best interest of each of our clients respectively. And when that's done, it's, you know, it's so much smoother. And so that's what we always want to be focusing on with all the parties involved.
Great advice for our group. So thank you.
Yeah.
Guys, this is great. Thanks for teeing us up and getting us ready for 2025 spring market that I hope springs. And you know, you guys bring such a good perspective with your experience and responsibility. So thank you very much. Elizabeth, do you have anything you want to add?
No, just a big thank you again for shedding light on our New York real estate activity, and let's stay positive moving forward.
Great.
Sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Excellent.
Have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you again.